I'm Bruce Bugbee, professor at Utah State University, and I'm pleased to be giving this talk for the Moab Festival of Science. The reason I was asked to give this talk is we have been funded in the crop physiology laboratory here at Utah State University for almost 40 years now to study growing food on Mars. So in this talk, I want to take you with me into our laboratory and into the studies we're doing to help you understand what the challenges are for living on Mars and growing food on Mars. NASA is a bunch of rocket scientists, and they're really good at rockets. They are not such experts in plant biology, so they fund universities to study this sort of thing. UC Davis now has some funding on this. Several other universities have been funded over the years. We, here at Utah State University, are the longest running funding from NASA, longest continuous product. So, since you're in Moab and we're in Logan, I like to think of everything we do as thinking in thin air. And NASA loves it. I say, look, we're doing studies at 85% of sea level pressure at no extra charge. You should keep funding us. You should quit funding all those people down at sea level. We're closer to outer space automatically. This is our campus, the old Maine with the Bear River Range mountains in the background. We're at about 5,000 feet here in Logan. The Bear River Range mountains are right just under 10,000 feet, right behind us and right behind campus. I got to tell you, I show this slide every time I talk at some other university or some other conference because I want all the best and brightest students in the world to come to Utah State University to study. We have a beautiful campus. And for that matter, whole state is beautiful. You're in a great spot listening to this. So many of you are familiar with going to Mars because of watching the movie, The Martian. And in that movie, Mark Watney, played by Matt Damon, is abandoned, is stranded on Mars. He's left for dead, he's not dead, and he's okay, but what's he gonna eat? And as it turns out, he has some potatoes, and he grows potatoes in Martian soil to give himself enough food till NASA can launch a rescue mission. That movie has done more for horticulture than of just about anything we've done in the last 20 years. Lots of people got interested in horticulture because of that movie. I personally got interviewed by more than 20 journals and magazines about how real the movie was. And I could do a whole talk about things in the movie that aren't exactly right. Maybe I'll mention some of them in here. But hey, it's science fiction. The concept is right on the money. We have to grow our own food there. So let's take a look at what this looks like on Mars. So here's Mark Watney. Here's his potatoes. He's in the shelter. He had to tape it off. Here's the Martian soil. He's growing his own potatoes on Mars. And he uses recycled waste from the other astronauts as fertilizer. He makes water out of hydrogen and oxygen. And it's a great movie. If you haven't seen it, go see it. If you've already seen it, go see it again. So this is a prelude to what we're talking about in our research here. Here's a picture of the Earth from the moon. Now, when we think about going to Mars, it's a lot farther than going to the moon. Let me tell you how hard it is to get to Mars by ratios of going to the space station and going to the moon. If we're in Moab, let's put this right over here, Moab. Going back and forth to the space station is like going back and forth almost between Moab and Arches. It's maybe about as hard as going to some of the famous arches in Moab. It's an easy one-day hike. So this is space station, and I'm going to abbreviate that ISS, space station. Really easy, and we do that almost every day for breakfast. Now, going to the moon is like going from Moab to the Salt Lake City airport. Now, this would be the moon. Still not bad. If you want to gas up the car and plan for the trip a little bit, that's going to the Salt Lake City airport from Moab. Going to Mars from Moab, off scale. Going to Mars, by this analogy, is like going to Antarctica. I'm going to put just A-N-T over here. That is a major trip. At the moment, we've never done it, but that gives you a sense of this is now a major expedition compared to something like going to the Salt Lake City airport. That's how hard it is. Here's the part we're working on. I'd like to show you, by analogy again, the challenges of what we're trying to do. Our whole planet right here is a life support system, hurtling through space. We've been going for millions of years, maybe 2 million years of people. We got plenty of water, we have oxygen, we have what we need, and think about it, we recycle everything. But can we do that in a much smaller space? Can we recreate all of the functions of the planet Earth in a tiny little life support system on Mars? That's the challenge. Can we duplicate the functions of our planet without our air, land, and water to buffer our mistakes? Think of how much stuff we put in the ocean now that we don't want. CO2, half of the CO2 we produce goes into the ocean. If we didn't have the ocean, we'd have way more CO2 in the atmosphere. We bury stuff in landfills because we've got massive land, and we put a lot of things into the air, and then they later degrade because of ultraviolet light. So our air, land, and water really help buffer our mistakes. We are not going to have that on Mars. We are challenged to do it in a small space, and here's the question. Can we make a life support system small and still be stable? How small can it be? For those of you that know something about engineering, in fluid dynamics, when we study water flow through a pipe, we have this thing called a Reynolds number. And when the flow gets too fast, it goes turbulent, and the system becomes turbulent. So you just make the pipe bigger to handle the flow. We need a Reynolds number for a whole life support system. How big does it have to be stable? That's the central thing we're working on. Let's take a look. Many of you who are older know about Biosphere 2. In Arizona, this was about 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago now. This is a picture of it. It was several acres under glass near Tucson. 8 people went in here with the goal of living in here for 2 years and recycling everything. And it was a controversial project because they didn't have it fully studied, but in my opinion, bless their hearts, they built it and they tried it. It was a Texas oil millionaire, Ed Bass, that built it, and they stayed in there for 2 years. Now they went slightly crazy. They'll tell you they went slightly crazy in here. We worked with them a lot to get their food production up because they weren't able to grow as much food as they needed. All of them lost from 30 to 50 pounds. They were thin as rails when they came out of here, but they stuck it out. This is Biosphere 2. Biosphere 1 is the whole planet Earth. How has NASA done this sort of thing? You bet they have. Here's 8 people that went in this cylinder and recycled the air and grew their own food. Here's Doug Ming. This is at NASA Kennedy. We worked closely with them on this. Now this was far more planned out and they didn't have any issues. These people didn't lose weight when they were inside of this. But these are the tests that we've already done. The Russians have done a lot with this, people in closed systems. So, what have we done here? These are individual polycarbonate chambers sealed, and we study photosynthesis and keep track of all the gases with tubes. One of my colleagues came in here and looked at this and said, oh my, this looks like a bad day in a spaghetti factory, looking at this tubes all over the place. This is our work to study the growth rates of plants with different gases, different compositions to try and get optimal growth rates. So with that, how are we going to do this on Mars? What are the resources that are there that we can use for life support? And what do we have to bring with us when we go? How much and what? It is incredibly expensive to launch stuff into space. When we go to the moon, every gram or ounce of mass is literally worth its weight in gold. And in Mars, it's much more expensive than that. So we absolutely want to have the lightest spaceship possible. In Moab, it'd be like going for a 3-year camping trip and having to carry all your stuff with you. How would you do that? It's not trivial. But you would do it by living off the land. You would use what you found along the way because you just can't possibly bring it all with you. To do that, we have to bring in the most important equation in the world. Now, equations are inputs and they go to outputs. And when I say this, the physicists all say, wow, that would be E equals mc squared. But that's a theoretical equation. Here's the most important equation in the world. Do you recognize that? We're taking CO2, carbon dioxide, and water. This is a low energy gas and water, and turning it into CH2O, which is carbohydrate. This is the generic form of sucrose and all carbohydrates, starch, and a high energy gas, oxygen. Oxygen is rocket fuel. Imagine that. Low energy gas and water into a high energy solid and rocket fuel. This is the equation that's going to allow us to live on Mars. And this equation is so famous, we give it a name, photosynthesis. Everybody learns this in high school biology. They learn it again in beginning biology classes. But we take this equation and analyze it for mass balance. Now, the first law of thermodynamics says energy in equals energy out. So something's missing. You can't take low energy inputs and magically make high energy outputs. In spite of some claims of people, you can't do it. What's missing in this equation? When we run it backwards, it's called respiration. And this is probably the second most important equation in the world. So we go back and forth. We grow the food, we eat the food, we grow the food. There's the part that's missing. Light, photons. And when we get right down to it, the theoretical minimum number of photons is about 10 to make 1 mole of carbon dioxide become 1 mole of carbohydrate. So now you can see the calculations we can do. How much light do we have? how much food can we produce from this. We model this all the time. Mars has about half as much light as we have on the planet Earth. So we're going to have a bigger agricultural area, but we can still do it. Now, can we get water? We're pretty sure Mars has water. And if we go in the right places, it's frozen, but we can get water on Mars. Can we get carbon dioxide on Mars? By now, everybody knows about carbon dioxide on the Earth. It's going up. How about Mars? Does Mars have an atmosphere? Not much. It's about 1% of our atmosphere, but it's almost pure carbon dioxide. So when we look at this, the Earth has about 40 pascals of oxygen, of carbon dioxide. This is 400 parts per million. Mars has 950 pascals. There's ample CO2 on Mars. So look, think about it. There's the three inputs: light, carbon dioxide, and water. Carbohydrate isn't just food. Carbohydrate is trees. It's 2x4s. We can build everything. We can build shelter if we can run this equation on Mars, and there's no reason we can't. We just need to do it efficiently and gradually start making our end products right from this equation. So we show that equation in every textbook, just the way I had it written, and I think this is really misleading to students. It's doing students a disservice to write it like that. Here's how we should write it. CO2 and water, tiny, a 2-point font, and we're going to carbohydrate and oxygen because these are energetically massive, and kaboom! Now we bring in our photons and we push this thing uphill with light. This is a better diagram of photosynthesis. We ought to be calling this thing the Utah diagram because we thought of it here in Utah and put it in all the high school books to show them how amazing this equation is. The USU diagram, we've called it up here. So every artist makes a picture of this glorious life on Mars. Here's one with a nice greenhouse, and the people are all down here sheltered because of the cosmic radiation, but the plants are in this beautiful greenhouse, and who wouldn't want to walk out there and care for the plants on Mars? But look at this diagram. See these rocks here? These are basketball-sized meteors that come hurling in at the speed of light. You tell me they're not going to break that glass and puncture this thing, and even if we made something that could withstand that bombardment, we still have to filter the very short wavelengths of cosmic radiation. So we're not going to have this above ground. For protection, we're going to bury it, just like the people. Cosmic radiation is just as damaging to plants as it is to people, so we bury it underground, and now we have indoor agriculture on Mars. And here's another diagram that's more realistic of growing our foods. To do that, we need to get the light to them. One of our great breakthroughs here, and it's just happened in the last 9 months, we originally were going to do big mirrors and fiber optics to transmit the light. And they're very efficient transmitting light. They're expensive, but to NASA, it's the weight that matters, not the cost. But those glass fiber optics, they're pure silicon dioxide, are heavy, and heavy is bad. We ran the numbers here and determined that the state-of-the-art solar panels and state-of-the-art light-emitting diodes are lighter weight than solar fiber optics. So we changed the whole NASA program, and now we're focused on growing the plants with LED technologies, and that's a huge part of our research here. Mark Watney talked about growing food. Photosynthesis is not the same as food. That makes cellulose and a lot of other things. So what do we do to actually grow food? Back to our gas exchange system. Here, Here's photosynthesis. We have also been funded to do studies on the space station, and here's our little chambers on the space station measuring photosynthesis. Now, unfortunately, these chambers don't have plants in them, but if you look closely at these chambers, there's some Russian writing on these because we've collaborated with the Russians to get stuff into space and to do this. How about water? How are we going to get water? Mark Watney mixed hydrogen and oxygen. Let's model water recycling. We can do this in 30 seconds. Here's a big glass dome for our modeling, and we put a house in there and a yard, and the people are giving off carbon dioxide, growing plants. That's turned into oxygen. So this is the loop for gas. And if we grow just enough food for everybody, it automatically balances oxygen. We get just the right amount of oxygen. So the gas loop is really beautifully closed by growing plants. On the other side, we have waste recycling. And in the process of growing the food, we get water. And it turns out we get way more purified water from the plants than we are ever going to need. If we grow enough food to feed a person, we get 200 liters every day of purified water. Now this is water vapor, it's distilled water, and we condense it back to liquid water in the system. So the plants give us oxygen, they give us food, and they give us purified water, just like they do on Earth, same thing. One of the things we have done is push plants hard to get high yields because we don't want to have an enormous space farm. Here is some of our hydroponic wheat. You can see the roots down here. This is only 21 days old. We found that the wheat yields can be 5 times what they are in the field on Earth. Now, to be fair, we cheated because we gave them bright light. We gave them even more sunlight than they would get in the field on Earth to get this. But when everything is optimum, yields can be enormous compared to field yields. A couple comments on lighting now. This is one of my favorite pictures. This is a picture of a tungsten light bulb built by Westinghouse in the 120 years ago. And it was designed to simulate full sunlight. And it's a 100 kilowatt lamp to get into full sunlight. I was visiting the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry and saw this light and saw the incredible. Now we do the same thing with about 1 kilowatt of electric lighting. That is how far the science of electric lighting has come in 120 years. With LED technology, not just for lighting people, but for lighting plants too. A couple comments on colors of light. People think green light bounces off of plants, so green light must be wasted by plants. And when I say, where did you get that idea? They pull out the plant physiology textbook that I have used in teaching, and here's a picture of the book. Now look at this. This is 2002 edition. Let's open this to the graph on colors of light. And if you have taken classes in biology, you know chlorophyll absorbs blue light and it absorbs red light, and there's hardly any absorption in green light. Now, blue and red LEDs are very efficient, so you would think we'll just use blue and red LEDs to grow plants. This is the actual graph out of this book, and under the graph it says chlorophyll absorbs minimal green light. Okay, now we fast forward to the 6th edition in 2015. Here's the book. There is the same graph. And on top of that graph, it says multiple pigments absorb radiation from 400 to 700. These are visible wavelengths. There's pigments that absorb green. We know the green penetrates the canopies now and does wonderful things. that we didn't understand before we started doing this research. What I'd like to do is show you a picture of a cross-section of a leaf with blue light, green light, and red light shining on the leaf to look at penetration of green light. This is from Broderson and Vogelman, a beautiful paper. This leaf is this thick. The blue and the green get absorbed right away. The green penetrates. It lights up the whole leaf. You can see the value of green light from this. This is one of our fundamental findings. All the colors of light help to grow plants. This is a study with the blue and red light, which makes it look purple, and white light. This is the intensity of light, and I'm going to walk you through what we found. It's just 4 treatments. These had a little bit more intensity, and so this tested 2 things. Can we make them grow faster with higher light, and do they grow faster with red and blue versus mixed colors? This has a lot of white light. Beautiful plants. These look awful. They're not very psychologically appealing, but if that light is more efficient, then we should look at using it. Here's the dry mass. First thing we see, this blue and red light didn't help at all. They were both 100 grams. The white light treatment and the purple light. That's been a myth in the world of lighting that green light is wasted, and it's not wasted. It grows fine plants. It's no better, no worse. Now look at this. This one was 127. Whoa, it's got less light and more growth. This one was 135. Less light, more growth. What's going on? These 2 treatments had far red light. That's a wavelength we can't quite see, but we trick the plants into thinking they're in the shade, and if they think they're in the shade, they expand their leaves more to capture more light. So we use far red light to make them get bigger, and in fact, with 30 plus 50 is 300, we got more growth with far red light than without far red. This is another emerging technology in the world of lighting. And there's a picture. The same lettuce, standard white light, and now white light with just 10% more photons from far red. Soil. How are we going to grow the plants on Mars? Here's Mark Watney digging up lunar regolith to get the soil. Here's the amount of nutrients 10 people would need to live on Mars for 3 years. Now, this is 2, 3, look at all the nitrogen. That's more than the sum of all the other elements. We would need to haul this to Mars unless we can find a way to get it there. And you can see the importance of nitrogen. If we can get nitrogen on Mars, we don't have to haul it from the Earth. It turns out the Martian atmosphere has a tiny bit of nitrogen. And if we can figure out how to fix that nitrogen and get it useful for plants, we don't have to bring nitrogen from the Earth. That's a huge advance, and it's one of the things we're working on here in collaboration with Professor Lance Seefeld in the Chemistry and Biochemistry department, using organisms to fix nitrogen on Mars into fertilizer for plants. I'm going to stop at this slide. Looks like a dark slide. It looks like the night sky in Moab. Here's some mountains, here's the sky. What's remarkable about this slide? Remember how I showed you a slide of a picture of the Earth from the moon and how beautiful the Earth looked? Look closely at this sky right there. When you look at the sky at night, can you see Mars? Yeah, you can. You got to have really good eyesight or binoculars or a telescope and you can see Mars. That is the Earth from Mars. We're a long ways away from home when we're on Mars. So one of the things NASA has studied extensively is psychological effects of being that far from home. It's a fascinating quest. They've had studies in various places on Earth, remote places with people to study living isolated. They'll have communication. I guess if they go there before COVID, they're pretty well isolated from getting COVID. So it's a good strategy, but it's complicated. And they could have a lot of Zoom meetings with people back on Earth, but they're just not going to see them. So I'm going to stop there. Thanks for listening. Have a great science festival. And I'm honored to be part of your festival and give this talk.